Okay, so our next presentation is Werner. Is Werner in the audience? There you go. If you could come on down and get yourself set up. Thank you so much. So we saw Werner do his dangerous demo. So now we can understand how he makes those dangerous demos 5 nines reliable. I mean, let's face it, it worked. And if you can do that time and time again, just unplug.
Okay, I'll try to keep my time. Give me a couple of minutes. Yeah, all right. Hi again. Basically, I'm going to show you a little bit about what we have been doing, and some of it will be some of the same slides I showed you yesterday. For those of you that were here for the demos, they actually worked, and if you were not here, I recommend going back and looking at maybe the videos later on, because I don't think I will have time to do the demos here. Okay, so just a bit of a background on where we come from. Actually, someone here said, well, you know, it was quite impressive demos, especially since you came from a big company. I read it like dinosaur company. He said, well, if it was only 2 guys, it wouldn't be that impressive. But anyways, I am part of a big group called Telenor, and it was not established yesterday. It has been an incumbent in Norway. As the, you know, I remember when my father wanted to have a fixed line established in the 70s. You know, it was like half a year wait, and you had to have a interest-free loan given to Telenor for quite a lot of money. Of course, a lot of that has changed, and I think Telenor has been quite successful at taking on those changes. It went from being a fully owned company by this state-owned company into a commercial company, and has managed to attract or get customers in 13 different markets. So in total, I think we are just above 200 million customers. So the footprint is in Europe, and the sheer number of users is mostly in Asia. So it's a fairly big and classic telco group that has been going through these transitions. I also discussed with some of you guys the kind of people in this company now. It's 30,000. Not all of them are software engineers. But actually, at the point of time, Telenor was one of the major companies in Norway hiring engineers, software engineers. And products and companies like Opera Software, that's doing a web browser, was spun out of Telenor. Also Tandberg, the video company that was acquired by Cisco, was spun out of Telenor to some extent. So there's some history here. Now, in this giant, there's a small group of people, 200, and it's called Telenor Digital. That's always interesting. We heard about digital. Fax was digital. Someone mentioned that. But basically, the idea has been to re-establish an organization that, again, consists of engineering capacities. And this group of people is doing various things. Some have been successful. Some have not. We tried to build a movie streaming service. There were others doing that, slightly better. We were engaged in Firefox OS. Not sure if many of you have Firefox phones. But we are also doing some things in the area of communications. And some of you are familiar with Appear.in as a service, which is built by one of our sister teams. Then, of course, what I showed earlier today, and also we are also looking at how we can do things in the core of the mobile network, which is also core to the business. This is where we are making the money of today. And the idea behind the project was actually to look at the core business, see, is it really so that it's impossible to run and build and test things in this setup like the internet companies are doing every day? And traditionally, the answer has been no. The division of work has been so that the innovation has been left to others, typically Ericsson, Huawei, and so on. And then the telcos have been driving this into the market. But we thought that would be interesting to see, looking at the core network, can we actually apply some of the same tools, the same people, the same logic to this stack? and by that explore new ideas. And some of the ideas that we have been looking at was demoed earlier today. I'll come back and tell you a little about it later in the presentation. But basically, this was a very big no-go just a few years ago. These were big black boxes that we were not supposed to touch. And of course, if you come to any of the operations today and say, I want to fiddle around with your HLR or MSC or whatever in a running operation, the answer is, of course, a big no-go, because they think this guy has nothing to do in a live running network, which is maybe true. So what we ended up doing was to establish basically a full stack MVNO setup, where we use standardized MVNO interfaces to get radio access, but all the rest is taken care of by the team that I'm heading, which is less than 15 guys, mostly software engineers. And by doing so, we are then exploring new ways of running a stack that has been established like from the early 90s. A working name for our explorative operator is LOLTEL. Has very few, very exclusive number of customers. We call them friends and fools. And it's the smallest but most innovative operator in Norway. Won't go too much into the setup, but you'll see this in the slide deck. This is what we have. We have a mixture of software components sourced, where we have been able to work with open source companies. We are doing that. We're not. We have actually bought these components, but it's all managed by the engineers in the team. And we are looking into various components and building them from the ground up. So the demo I showed earlier about choosing to pick up any call or send messages and whatever from your web browser is enabled by WebRTC competence and software that we have built in-house. So these are quite major undertakings normally, but by standing on shoulders of giants, using open source components, working with open source companies and so on, a fairly small team is able to make services that otherwise is hard to find in traditional setups. So this pinkish color is indicating areas where we have actually done things on our own, often with using open source. And this is now running both in the public cloud and can also be run in private cloud settings. So these are also things which is quite different from the classic setup. Now, when it comes to the tools we use, they're also very different from what you typically see used in a traditional telco setup. Most of you guys will probably recognize most of these names. Kamailio is, of course, here, Daniel. I need to add the Ubuntu phone maybe as well. But stuff like Docker, WebRTC, and of course Wireshark is in daily use. And if you look at this picture, you see that even though we are relating to the classic SS7 networks and so on, all of it is converted to the IP-based transport. So even if our HLR is talking to an SS7 network, is still over SIG-trans. So we can then use Wireshark easily, and the tools that the developers are used to. I showed this last year. We have a recipe. I'll quickly go through that. First of all, you need to believe that there is still work to be done or things to be discovered in the telco stack. And then you fill up the team with software engineers with access to all the tools that any startup today would take for granted. Of course, you need someone that understands the telco domain to some extent. But as I said last year, you want to keep it as small as possible. So we had like one guy, and in the beginning he was very much saying, no, this is not possible, you shouldn't do it, you couldn't do it. But we have eventually been able to convince him otherwise. But he's also extremely important when it comes to connecting and actually talking to the host networks that we are trying to connect to. This can be done on standard MVNO interfaces. That's what we've done. Also, we have been working with different kinds of vendors in this space. Many of you are represented here. And of course, you want to take advantage of the tools and the clouds that's available out there. So for instance, we have actually done some work on an SMSC, which I guess in the 90s was quite a big endeavor. But by getting access to open source stacks, combining it with the tools from public clouds and so on, this is a one-man job in a couple of months and you have something going. And this is quite unheard of only a few years ago. Also, in our setup, from when we started this as basically a lab experiment, we really want to have access to real end users. So it's not enough for us to show this to only our own team. We want to be able to expose this to real people that can give us real feedback, and that is very important for us. And then, of course, we try to be somewhat clever, trying to do things, and that's our little secret sauce, and that is what turns out to be included in some of these components. And yeah, it's not unlike any other startup, I think. Now, what happened last year was that we set this up, and we have proven that it's actually able to make it work functionally. And as in actually the demos did actually all work today. And I'm actually using this as my prime service for my own mobile service. And now we have actually been challenged by our mother company to see, okay, now you have something nice. Can it actually be exposed to real users that also wants to potentially pay for it? After all, we are a business. It's not a non-profit thing, so you want to be able to actually bring this to the market. And it should be good enough to actually be worthwhile paying for it. Now, this brings in another thing, and that is once money is in play, and you regard it as a telco, there will be regulation. And one of the things that this is driving towards is, of course, some nines. Talked about that yesterday, that we have been running 3 nines for a long time. 96.99, that's 3 nines. But that doesn't really cut it, because the services that you compete against, they have more nines than that. And that brings in another dimension to the whole thing. So this is a calculation. Actually, if you look at the 5 nines, which normally is associated with the telcos, it gives you 5 minutes and 35 seconds a year to have the service down. If you down to 3 nines, it's plenty of time, a full day, full working day. And I'm not sure if this is true, but if you look at this table, I think this is what, if you just look at the last column, this is actually what's available for innovation. So this is actually showing you why you don't see a lot of innovation in these networks that bring 5 nines. They only have 5 minutes and 35 seconds to do it. Not sure if that's exactly true, but maybe it is. And this is kind of what it looks like, or has been, I think, for not only the telco industry, that the focus has been on many nines, and the number of features rolled out at any given time to real users is kind of not looking so good. What we're aiming for is, of course, the opposite. And I think this is kind of expected, not from telcos, but also from anyone doing a web scale application. I think we briefly talked about this yesterday, but telco is no longer the only one having expectations on uptime. I think if you look at downtime, if Facebook is down for an hour, it makes headline news. Not only in Norway, but across the world. So I think web scale and telco grade, is kind of the same when it comes to the number of nines. But for some reason, the web scale guys didn't implement this algorithm. And that is basically what we need to get at too. We need to match a lot of nines expected from the end users, but you can't go stale when it comes to pushing new services out, new features, test new things, and so on. And that is actually a very important part of our setup. We're trying to mimic and replicate this setup. Now, getting nines up is quite hard. Getting 5 nines up is, I don't know if it's possible. And combining it with this is there's a reason why this has not really been done for telcos earlier, okay? So as I said yesterday, I've heard of, outside the Telenor Group, projects where you replace or upgrade HLRs. It's an 18-month process, and in the best case, no one recognizes it because everything was okay. And in the worst case, your network is down, and well, it's all difficult. And that's not really a good place to be. As part of this, we have been working hard this year to go from a setup. We had a single environment combining development, staging, and production. And that gave us a lot of flexibility, but it did not give us a lot of nines. We also had a setup where it's imported only single tenancy, and we can only have a single network connected to it. Now we are at the stage where we can actually spin up kind of any number of development environments, starting from running everything on a single PC up to having cloud-based networks mimicking the total setup. We have separate staging environment, as you expect, and of course we have a production environment, which should then be stable and well known what's running there. And this is quite hard work, going from a pure lab environment, lab setup, and getting here. This has been a major undertaking. Also, we have added the ability to host multiple brands on top of this. And also, of course, we want to run this on a potential global scale. And we want to be able to have multiple access networks into this setup. So this is where we are. Some experiments that we have done and actually worked today, that was really good, was this in-browser mobile phone thing. So all calls that hitting the network towards me will also be forked into a WebRTC-based mobile phone. And there I can send, receive messages, MMS, SMS, etc. And also we can escalate any call from pure GSM and up to full video conference if you're near a PC. We also demonstrated the ability to in-call activate speech to text. And once you have the text, you can do interesting things like translation. You could keep it. I guess you could also detect mood and so on. So I think the telco industry still carries a lot of voice traffic and will do so for a long time. And I think combining this with the new tools and the new capabilities coming out of machine learning is a great opportunity for the industry. However, I think the current setup in many of the core networks doesn't really easily allow for these things to happen, and this is maybe something we can help change a bit. Also showed you a quick demo on if they send that, which is basically programming for anyone, where we can have events popping out of our core network, and you can trigger various other things like turning off lamps. You can record the calls and SMSs in Google Docs, for instance, and so on. And this is quite powerful, actually. I think we've seen some integrations with Slack, which normally, if you want to do it one by one, it's a bit of work. Since if this and that is already integrated with Slack, it's a 2-minute job for me to have a copy of all SMSs coming into a Slack channel. The other way is not that easy, but some of these things can actually be done very quickly, and hopefully we'll see real end users actually utilize these services. Now, what's up next? We do see quite a lot of, there's been transition, I would say, internally in the company and also within its team that, wow, this is actually possible. And then we do show these demos and ask them what would it take if you wanted to replicate some of these user experiences. They realize that, okay, there is something here which is hard to do in the current setup. So we are getting quite a lot of interest from the various business units out there. And the next is, of course, to see if we can reach out to more. So now we go from 100 users, and well, I'm not sure if we're going to reach 200 million by the end of next year, but hopefully we will be able to power some of these brands and sub-brands, and this is actually on the agenda. Then we built this not to do everything on our own. So we want to engage internally and also externally with developers that have ideas. And they could be big or they could be small. But what we want to achieve, like many other companies are trying to do, is to engage with the brain power of the many. And it could be as simple as let people play around with if this and that. Or it could be exposing APIs to connect machine learning engines that you have built yourself, or combine this with what comes out to the giants like Google, IBM, and Microsoft. And then a funny one, there's always debate internally. Now we have something working, we can make calls, and everyone's fine with that. But during the last 20 years, there has been an innovation, and I think, Dean, you touched upon it in your presentation earlier today, and it's called IMS and Volte. And this is what it looks like. Actually, this is from the standards bodies, I think. Looks pretty nice. This is basically the full IMS stack with lots of different nodes and a few interfaces to be implemented. Now, you don't need all of these necessarily to make your first call, but the scope includes all of this. And again, I think you need some creative guy to clean up this mess. So we have some ideas on how to do that, simplify things quite radically, because by building a system, so we are not, I'll just go back to this one. Even though you recognize these names, if you read the standards and so on, we actually don't build individual components for the sake of competing with vendors that are living off selling SMSCs or MSCs or whatever. We are building a system or kind of a platform. And by doing so, we can actually make some shortcuts if needed. We don't need to have standardized interfaces internally if we don't need to. This means that it will be very specialized for our setup. It also gives us a lot of flexibility, and also I think we can avoid being fully standard compliant on every interface in this stack. So we will probably reduce the number of nodes and interfaces by a factor of, I don't know, but maybe 10% of them will be left. We need to be fully standards compliant on the external interfaces, of course. But on the inside, we can do tricks that enables us to do what we want when we want it. There's a risk here, of course. It won't be able to replace a single thing here easily, because we might do things that's non-standard internally. But that, I think, is a price we're willing to pay to gain speed and agility when it comes to development. It's a marvelous picture. I don't know who drew it, but it's a piece of art, this picture. Yeah, so really we want to do that. Beyond, who knows? It's 2016 now. Next year we'll be trying to prove that the platform is actually capable of taking in, a number larger than 100. What next? Telenor has about 200 million subscribers at the moment. Slowly growing, of course. But there's many more out there, and I think we would potentially be interested in talking to people that can enable this platform to be used also outside the Telenor footprint. So if you're an operator, you have my email at the end of the presentation. So, just to recap, this started out in 2014, and some of you have asked me, how did you manage to convince management in your company to actually sponsor this? And we were lucky with the timing, digital, and people start to understand that things are changing. And we had people with faith and saying, okay, let's see what you can do. And I think we have proven that, yeah, this is something that is possible to do. And they are actually challenging us to take this further. And this is what we've proven in 2015. Now, I talked a little bit about the nines. Hopefully, you can turn the nines into our advantage, so we can roll out features much more frequently, while retaining a quality of the service and the experience that people expect. And then next year, we hope that we can actually scale both in size and in innovation. So we hope to be able to roll out new features more frequently than today, while adding real customers to the platform. And by that, I say thank you very much. And
excellent. Thank you so much, Werner. So if you could take your laptop over to the side. Elgren, if you could come down and get yourself set up. Any questions for Werner? I'll ask you one. Let me just get you the microphone.
Or I can speak here, I guess.
No.
No, I cannot.
I'm
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Next speaker.
Yeah.
Tight time.
Yeah.
So what are you thinking would be the business model behind other operators using your platform?
The first shot will be free, and then we'll take it from there. I don't know. That will need to be discussed, but the idea here is to have reach and explore and make sure that it's available to many.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that will be the starting point, but
Yeah.
we haven't gone into the details.
Gotcha. No problem. Any other questions? If not, again, congratulations on having all your working dangerous demos. That was excellent. Thank you so much, Werner. Yeah, thank you.